Hello everyone. Tonight, I want to take you along a quiet medieval road. Strangely, travellers almost never went alone back then. Even merchants and pilgrims waited for companions. Why was a simple journey so dangerous? Tonight, I'll explore the reasons behind this forgotten rule of the road. And before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you truly enjoy the stories I share here. In the medieval world, travelling alone was rarely a wise decision. Roads stretched across forests, mountains, and open plains, often poorly maintained and largely unprotected. For most people, the journey itself was far more dangerous than the destination. Because of this, travellers in medieval times almost always preferred to move in groups rather than venture out alone. The reasons were practical, rooted in safety, survival, and the harsh realities of life during those centuries. One of the greatest dangers on medieval roads was banditry. Bandits and highway robbers frequently hid along remote routes, especially in forests or narrow passes, where travellers had little chance of escape. A lone traveller carrying coins, goods, or supplies was an easy target. Even a small group of criminals could overpower a single person quickly, but when travellers moved together in caravans or groups, the risk decreased significantly. Bandits were less likely to attack a larger group that could defend itself or raise an alarm. Merchants especially understood this risk. They often formed caravans, travelling with other merchants, guards, and sometimes even pilgrims heading in the same direction. The strength of numbers created a sense of security in a world where law enforcement was limited or non-existent along many roads. Another reason travellers avoided travelling alone was the unpredictable nature of medieval roads. Unlike modern highways, many medieval roads were nothing more than dirt paths that wound through wilderness. During rainy seasons, these roads turned into deep mud, making travel slow and exhausting. Wagons could become stuck, horses could stumble, and travellers could easily lose their way. When people travelled together, they could help each other overcome these obstacles. If a wagon wheel broke, several people could repair it. If a horse became injured, others could assist in caring for the animal. Travelling alone meant that even a small problem could quickly become a life-threatening situation. Navigation was also a major challenge. There were very few reliable maps available to ordinary travellers. Signposts were rare, and many routes were known only through word of mouth. Forest paths could split in many directions, and travellers unfamiliar with the area could easily wander into dangerous or impassable terrain. Groups often included someone who had travelled the route before and knew the safest paths, nearby villages or places where travellers could find shelter. This shared knowledge made group travel far more reliable than travelling alone. Medieval travellers also depended heavily on hospitality along their journeys. Inns existed, but they were not always available, especially in rural regions. Many travellers relied on monasteries, villages, or roadside shelters for food and rest. Arriving as part of a group made it easier to gain acceptance and assistance from local communities. A lone stranger might be viewed with suspicion, especially in times of war or disease. But a group of travellers, particularly if they included pilgrims or merchants, was often seen as more trustworthy. Wild animals were another danger that made solitary travel risky. Medieval Europe still contained vast forests where wolves, bears, and other predators roamed, While attacks on humans were not extremely common, the possibility was real enough to concern travelers. A single person moving quietly through a forest at dusk could become vulnerable. A group of people, however, made noise, carried torches, and could defend themselves if necessary. The presence of multiple travelers discouraged animals from approaching. Disease and injury were also constant concerns during long journeys. Medical knowledge was limited, and even a minor wound could become infected. If a traveler fell from a horse, twisted an ankle, or became ill, traveling companions could help carry supplies, seek assistance, or guide the injured person to the nearest settlement. A lone traveler suffering such an accident might have little chance of survival, especially in isolated areas far from help. Pilgrimage routes offer another example of why medieval travelers moved in groups. Pilgrimages were extremely common in the Middle Ages, with people traveling long distances to sacred destinations. These journeys could take weeks or months. Pilgrims often gathered into groups before leaving their hometowns, forming temporary communities on the road. Traveling together provided companionship as well as safety. Many pilgrim groups shared food, stories, and prayers during their journey, creating bonds that made the difficult travel more bearable. Weather posed another serious challenge for travelers. Medieval journeys were slow and exposed to the elements. Sudden storms, freezing winds, or heavy snowfall could transform a road into a dangerous path within hours. When travelers moved in groups, they could build fires together, share blankets, or take turns keeping watch during the night. These small acts of cooperation often made the difference between enduring the journey and suffering from exposure. Communication was another benefit of group travel. Medieval travelers often exchanged news, rumors, and information about political events, wars, or safe routes. Because communication networks were limited, the road itself became a place where information traveled. Merchants might warn others about dangerous regions, while pilgrims might share knowledge of welcoming monasteries or reliable inns. This flow of information helped travelers avoid dangers and plan safer journeys. Economic reasons also encouraged group travel. Merchants transporting valuable goods preferred caravans because they could share the cost of guards and protection. Hiring guards individually would have been expensive, but when several merchants traveled together, the cost could be divided among them. Caravans sometimes included dozens of people, wagons, and animals moving slowly across long distances. These caravans became moving communities, protecting their goods and supporting each other along the road. There was also the simple psychological comfort of companionship. Medieval travel was exhausting, lonely, and often frightening. Roads passed through dark forests, abandoned villages, and remote landscapes where travelers might walk for hours without seeing another person. Having companions to talk to, share meals with, and watch over each other during the night provided emotional reassurance. The presence of others made the journey feel less uncertain and less isolating. Another factor that discouraged solitary travel was the political instability of the medieval world. Borders between territories were not always clearly marked, and local lords often controlled different regions. Some lords demanded tolls from travelers passing through their lands. Groups were better able to negotiate or pay such tolls, while a lone traveler might be easily exploited or turned away. In times of conflict between kingdoms or rival lords, Travelers could even be mistaken for spies. Moving with a recognized group, such as a merchant caravan or pilgrim band, reduced these suspicions. Night travel presented additional dangers. Once darkness fell, roads became extremely difficult to navigate. There were no streetlights, and moonlight alone was often insufficient to safely guide a traveler through rough terrain. Many travelers stopped before sunset to set up camp or find shelter. Groups could organize watches during the night to guard against thieves or animals. A lone traveler trying to sleep beside the road would have little protection against danger. Religious and cultural customs also supported group travel. Many medieval people believed that traveling with companions increased their chances of receiving divine protection. Pilgrims often prayed together before beginning their journeys, and believed that collective faith strengthened their safety. These beliefs reinforced the practical advantages of traveling in groups. Even professional messengers and traders, who were accustomed to long journeys, rarely traveled completely alone. Couriers sometimes joined temporary caravans when passing through particularly dangerous areas. Traders moving between cities arranged to meet others along the road, so they could continue together for part of the journey. This flexible cooperation allowed travelers to adapt to the risks of different regions. Over time, certain roads became known for organized caravans. Major trade routes linking cities and markets often had predictable flows of merchants traveling together. Travelers sometimes waited in towns for several days, until enough people had gathered to form a safe group before departing. The delay was considered worthwhile because the journey would be far safer once the caravan began moving. In this way, medieval travel was rarely an individual activity. It was a shared experience shaped by the dangers of the time. The lack of strong, centralized policing, the unpredictable environment, and the constant risk of theft or injury made cooperation essential. Traveling together transformed a dangerous road into a manageable journey. Groups provided protection, knowledge, assistance, and companionship that a lone traveler could never guarantee. For medieval people, survival often depended on community. The road was simply another place where that principle applied, whether they were merchants transporting goods, pilgrims seeking spiritual fulfillment, or ordinary villagers traveling to distant markets. Most travelers understood the same truth in the medieval world. The safest path forward was rarely walked alone. The dangers of medieval travel were not limited to bandits, bad roads, or wild animals. Many other hidden risks made solitary journeys extremely unwise. Because of this, travelers instinctively sought the safety and cooperation that came from moving in groups. Over time, traveling together became almost an unwritten rule of the road, passed from one generation of travelers to the next. One important factor was the simple difficulty of transporting supplies. Medieval journeys often lasted for days or even weeks, depending on the distance. Travelers needed to carry food, water, clothing, tools, and sometimes trade goods. A single traveler could only carry a limited amount of supplies. If food ran out or a water source could not be found, the situation could quickly become dangerous. In a group, however, travelers could share their resources. One person might carry extra grain, another might have tools for repairing equipment, and someone else might bring cooking utensils. This sharing of supplies allowed the group to survive longer and travel farther than a lone individual. Cooking meals during travel also became easier when people traveled together. Preparing food on the road required gathering firewood, lighting a fire, and cooking the meal carefully so that supplies were not wasted. A single traveller performing all these tasks alone would lose valuable daylight that could have been used for moving forward. In a group, however, the tasks could be divided. Some people gathered wood, others prepared food, and others watched over animals or equipment. This cooperation made travel more efficient and less exhausting. Travellers also relied heavily on animals such as horses, mules, and oxen. These animals were essential for carrying goods or pulling carts, but they required care and attention. Animals needed to be fed, watered, and protected from injury. If a traveller's animal became sick or injured while travelling alone, the journey might come to an immediate end. But in a group, travellers could help redistribute the load among other animals or assist in treating the injured one. This support allowed the group to continue even when problems occurred. Bridges and river crossings presented another serious challenge. Many medieval bridges were narrow, damaged, or poorly maintained. In some places, bridges did not exist at all, forcing travellers to cross rivers using shallow fords or small ferries. Crossing a river alone could be extremely dangerous. Fast currents could sweep away a horse or wagon, and deep water could destroy valuable goods. When travellers moved in groups, they could assist each other during these crossings. Stronger travellers helped guide animals through the water, while others stabilized wagons or helped carry goods across safely. In certain regions, travellers also faced the threat of toll collectors or corrupt officials who demanded money for passing through a territory. While some tolls were legitimate and used to maintain roads or bridges, others were simply attempts to exploit travellers. A lone traveller had little power to argue or negotiate, but a group of travellers could question unfair demands or share the cost among themselves, making the situation less difficult for any single individual. Another important reason travellers avoided being alone was the fear of becoming lost. Many medieval roads passed through forests that stretched for miles without clear landmarks. Dense trees blocked the sun, making it difficult to determine direction. A traveller who lost the road might wander for hours or even days without finding the correct path again. Groups reduced this risk because multiple people could observe the surroundings and remember landmarks such as rivers, hills, or distinctive trees. Collective awareness helped prevent mistakes that could lead to dangerous detours. The presence of ruins and abandoned settlements along medieval roads also created unease among travellers. Wars, plagues, and economic decline had left many villages empty. These silent ruins often appeared suddenly along the roadside, creating an eerie atmosphere. People believed such places might be haunted or dangerous. Travelling alone through these locations could be frightening, especially at dusk when shadows grew long and visibility decreased. A group of travellers could move through these places with greater confidence, their shared presence easing fear and uncertainty. Another difficulty faced by medieval travellers was the lack of accurate timekeeping. Without modern clocks, travellers depended on the position of the sun or the ringing of church bells to measure time. This made it difficult to judge how far one could safely travel before nightfall. If darkness arrived unexpectedly, a lone traveller might be forced to camp in an unsafe area. Groups often included experienced travellers who understood how to estimate distances and plan stops before sunset. Their experience helped the entire group avoid unnecessary danger. Fires were also an important tool for travelers during overnight stops. A campfire provided warmth, light, and protection against animals. But maintaining a fire throughout the night required attention and effort. In a group, travelers could take turns adding wood and keeping the fire burning while others slept. A lone traveler might struggle to remain awake long enough to maintain the fire, increasing the risk of freezing temperatures or wandering animals approaching the campsite. Traveling with others also increased the chances of encountering helpful strangers along the road. Groups attracted attention from villages and inns because they represented potential customers or guests. Innkeepers often preferred serving groups because they brought more business. A lone traveler, especially one who appeared poor or unfamiliar, might be turned away due to suspicion. Groups were therefore more likely to receive hospitality and assistance from communities along the route. Storytelling and shared conversation played an important role during long journeys as well. Medieval travel involved hours of walking or riding through landscapes that changed slowly. Companions passed the time by telling stories, discussing local legends, sharing news, or singing songs. These activities helped maintain morale and reduced the mental strain of the journey. Loneliness could weigh heavily on a traveler, moving alone for days without meaningful interaction. Traveling in groups also allowed travelers to create systems of watch and protection during rest stops. At night, the group might assign one or two individuals to remain awake. While others slept, these watchkeepers listened for unusual sounds, monitored the animals, and ensured that fires did not spread accidentally. If danger approached, they could quickly alert the others. This organized watch system was nearly impossible for a single traveler to maintain alone. Another advantage of group travel involved dealing with unfamiliar cultures and languages. Medieval Europe contained many regions where dialects differed significantly. A traveler moving alone might struggle to communicate in a distant region. Within a group, however, someone might understand the local dialect or have previous experience visiting that area. This knowledge made it easier to buy supplies, ask for directions, or negotiate prices. Seasonal travel patterns also encouraged group journeys. During certain times of the year, especially after harvest seasons or before religious festivals, large numbers of people traveled simultaneously. Merchants moved goods to markets, pilgrims traveled to shrines, and laborers searched for work in distant towns. These seasonal waves of travelers naturally formed groups along the roads. Individuals often joined these temporary communities simply because it was safer to move with the crowd. Even rumors and superstition played a role in shaping travel habits. Medieval people believed many dangers lurked beyond the boundaries of familiar villages. Stories circulated about mysterious figures seen in forests, spirits haunting crossroads, or strange lights appearing at night. Whether these tales were true or exaggerated, they influenced how people thought about the road. Traveling with companions helped reduce the fear created by such stories. The presence of organized guilds and merchant associations also supported group travel. Merchants belonging to the same guild often coordinated their journeys to distant markets. By traveling together, they could protect valuable cargo and maintain strong trading networks. These guild caravans sometimes developed regular schedules, allowing traders from different regions to meet and move together. Over time, these practical and social reasons created a strong tradition of cooperative travel. The road itself became a shared space where strangers temporarily formed communities. People who had never met before might walk together for days, helping each other overcome the challenges of the journey. By the time they reached their destination, these travelers often felt a sense of connection built through shared hardship and cooperation. In many ways, medieval travel reflected the broader structure of medieval society. Life during that era depended heavily on cooperation within families, villages, and communities. Just as villagers worked together to harvest crops or build homes, travelers worked together to cross forests, rivers, and mountains. The dangers of the road reinforced a simple but powerful lesson that medieval people understood well. Survival was easier when people supported one another. For these reasons, the sight of travelers moving alone was relatively rare on medieval roads. Most people preferred the security of companionship and the strength that came from shared effort. The journey might still be long and difficult, but traveling together transformed the road from a lonely path into a collective experience. Another reason medieval travelers rarely moved alone was the constant uncertainty that surrounded distant lands. In an age when information traveled slowly and rumors often replaced reliable knowledge, the world beyond one's own village could seem mysterious and unpredictable. People often knew very little about the regions they were traveling through. Roads might suddenly change direction. Villages might no longer exist, and familiar landmarks might have been destroyed by war or natural disasters. When travelers moved in groups, they could combine their knowledge and experiences. One person might recognize a river bend or recall hearing about a nearby monastery, while another might remember which road led to a market town. This shared awareness greatly increased the chances of reaching the correct destination. Travelers also faced the problem of language barriers across regions. Although Latin served as a scholarly language, ordinary people spoke many different dialects and local languages. In some regions, even neighboring villages spoke noticeably different dialects. A traveler moving alone might struggle to communicate when asking for directions, food, or shelter. Within a group, however, someone often understood the local dialect or could interpret basic words and gestures. This small advantage could make the difference between finding help and being completely lost. The risk of theft did not come only from organized bandits hiding in forests. Opportunistic criminals could appear anywhere along the road. Markets, bridges, and crowded inns were places where thieves often operated quietly among travelers. A lone traveler carrying coins in a pouch or goods tied to a saddle could easily become a victim. In a group, however, travelers naturally watched over each other's belongings. Suspicious individuals were easier to notice when several people observed the surroundings. The simple presence of witnesses discouraged many thieves from attempting to steal. Another overlooked danger was exhaustion. Medieval travel required significant physical effort. Long distances were usually covered on foot or horseback, and the terrain could be rough or uneven. Travelers had to climb hills, cross muddy paths, and sometimes push wagons through difficult ground. Fatigue could slowly weaken a traveler, making them less alert to danger. When people traveled together, they encouraged each other to rest when necessary and helped maintain a steady pace. Companions could recognize signs of exhaustion in one another and suggest stopping before fatigue became dangerous. Illness during travel posed another serious risk. Medieval medicine was limited, and travelers often faced unfamiliar climates or contaminated water sources. Drinking from a polluted stream or eating spoiled food could quickly lead to illness. In a group, travelers could care for a sick companion, share medicine or herbs, and guide the ill person to the nearest village or monastery. Monasteries were especially known for providing care to travelers who fell sick. A lone traveler suffering from illness might struggle to reach help before the condition worsened. Fire hazards were also a concern during overnight stops. Travelers often built campfires to cook food or stay warm. But fire had to be carefully controlled. Dry grass or strong winds could quickly spread flames beyond the campsite. Groups made it easier to monitor the fire and prevent accidents. Several people could gather water, clear the surrounding area, and keep watch over the flames while others slept. This shared responsibility reduced the risk of a fire getting out of control. Another important factor was the protection of valuable documents and letters. Messengers, traders, and officials sometimes carried written documents sealed with wax that contained important information or instructions. Losing such documents could cause serious consequences for both the messenger and the sender. Traveling with others reduced the risk of theft or accidental loss. If one traveler became separated or injured, companions could ensure the documents continued safely toward their destination. Travelers also depended heavily on local knowledge about seasonal conditions. Certain roads became nearly impassable during rainy seasons, while mountain passes could be blocked by snow. Rivers that were easy to cross during dry months might become dangerous during floods. Groups often included experienced travelers who had made the journey before and understood these seasonal patterns. Their guidance helped the group choose safer routes or wait for better conditions before continuing. Nighttime brought its own challenges. Once darkness fell, medieval landscapes became extremely difficult to navigate. Without artificial lighting, even familiar roads could become confusing. Shadows created by trees and rocks could easily deceive the eye. Groups traveling together could carry torches or lanterns and help guide one another along the path. The combined light from several torches also made travelers more visible, reducing the chance of accidental collisions with other travelers or wagons moving in the opposite direction. Psychological fear played a larger role in medieval travel than many people realize. The medieval world was filled with folklore, legends, and beliefs about supernatural beings. Forests were often believed to contain spirits, witches, or mysterious creatures that appeared after sunset. While these stories were not necessarily real dangers, they influenced how travelers felt when moving through isolated places. A lone traveler walking through a silent forest at night might become overwhelmed by fear and imagination. In a group, conversation and shared confidence helped keep such fears under control. Travelers also needed protection for their animals and equipment during rest stops. Horses, mules, and oxen represented valuable property, and losing an animal could end a journey completely. Thieves sometimes attempted to steal animals while travelers slept. Groups could assign guards to watch over the animals and equipment throughout the night. This protection allowed the travelers to rest more peacefully. There were also situations where travelers had to pass through territories controlled by different rulers. Medieval Europe was divided into numerous small kingdoms, duchies, and lordships. Each region had its own rules, taxes, and expectations for visitors. A lone traveler unfamiliar with local customs might accidentally break a rule or offend local authorities. In a group, someone often had previous experience dealing with these regional differences and could guide the others through the correct procedures. Markets and trading fairs also encouraged travelers to move in groups. Large fairs attracted merchants from distant regions who brought cloth, spices, tools, and livestock to sell. Merchants often planned their journeys to arrive at these fairs together. Traveling in groups allowed them to protect valuable cargo and share information about market prices. By the time they reached the fair, many merchants had already formed temporary partnerships during the journey. Another advantage of group travel was the sharing of skills. Travelers came from many different backgrounds. One might be skilled at repairing leather straps or saddles. Another might know how to treat minor wounds using herbal remedies, while another might be good at repairing wagon wheels or sharpening tools. When these individuals traveled together, their combined skills made the journey much smoother. Problems that would overwhelm a single traveler could often be solved quickly by a group. Even weather forecasting depended on shared observation. Medieval people paid close attention to natural signs such as cloud formations, wind direction, or the behavior of birds. Groups could combine their observations to predict approaching storms or changes in temperature. If several travelers noticed signs of bad weather, the group might decide to stop early and seek shelter before conditions worsened. Over long journeys, friendships often developed among travelers who had started as strangers. These friendships helped maintain trust within the group. Travelers protected one another, shared stories from their home regions, and sometimes continued traveling together for weeks. In many cases, these temporary companions became long-term acquaintances who met again on future journeys. Because of all these reasons, the medieval road was rarely a place for solitary adventure. The challenges of distance, danger, uncertainty, and exhaustion made cooperation essential. Travelers understood that companionship increased their chances of completing the journey safely. By forming groups, they created small communities that moved slowly across the landscape, carrying goods, stories, news, and hope from one place to another. In the end, medieval travel was not just about reaching a destination. It was about surviving the journey itself, and in a world where danger could appear at any moment, most travelers believed that the road was far safer when it was shared with others rather than walked alone. Another reason medieval travelers rarely journeyed alone was the constant uncertainty surrounding the safety of unfamiliar territories. In the medieval period, the authority of kings and governments often weakened outside major cities. Many rural areas were controlled by local lords, knights, or small militias who enforced their own rules. When a traveller entered such territories alone, they might face questioning, suspicion, or even hostility. Groups of travellers, however, appeared more legitimate. Merchants, pilgrims, and traders travelling together often carried visible goods, religious symbols, or letters of passage that showed they had a purpose. Their collective presence made it easier to pass through these regions without unnecessary conflict. In addition to the many physical dangers of medieval travel, the legal and social environment also discouraged people from traveling alone. During the Middle Ages, personal identity and reputation were often tied closely to one's community. Most people were known within their village or town, and strangers were treated with caution. A lone traveller arriving in a new place without companions could easily be viewed with suspicion. Locals might wonder whether the stranger was a thief, spy, or wandering criminal. However, when several travellers arrived together, especially if they appeared to be merchants, pilgrims, or traders, they were more likely to be accepted and trusted. Groups naturally seemed more legitimate, reducing the risk of being questioned or turned away. Another important reason travellers formed groups was the need to protect money and trade goods. Medieval merchants often carried valuable items such as cloth, spices, metal tools, jewelry, or coins. These goods represented months or even years of hard work. Losing them to theft could ruin a merchant completely. Because of this risk, traders preferred to move in caravans where their combined presence made robbery more difficult. Some caravans included armed guards, while others relied simply on their numbers to discourage attacks. Even without weapons, a group of merchants standing together could resist a small group of thieves. Medieval travellers also depended heavily on animals, and protecting those animals required cooperation. Horses and mules were essential for carrying goods and supplies across long distances. Losing an animal could mean losing the ability to continue the journey. Animals could wander away at night, become frightened by predators, or be stolen by thieves. When travellers camped together, they could form small enclosures for the animals and assign people to watch them. This collective effort made it far easier to keep the animals safe. Food preparation and rationing also benefited from group travel. Travellers had to carefully manage their supplies because the next village or market might be many miles away. If someone misjudged their food supply while travelling alone, they could quickly become hungry or weak. In a group, however, food could be shared and rationed more wisely. If one traveller ran out of bread or grain, others could provide small portions until new supplies were found. This sharing helped prevent dangerous situations where someone might become too weak to continue. Another practical advantage of group travel involved repairing equipment. Wagons, saddles, ropes, and leather straps were constantly under stress during long journeys. A broken strap or cracked wheel could delay travel for hours or days. Within a group, travellers often possessed different practical skills. One person might know how to repair a saddle, another might know how to carve wooden pegs to fix a wagon wheel, and another might carry spare tools. By combining their skills and materials, the group could quickly solve problems that would leave a lone traveller stranded. River crossings were another moment when cooperation was extremely valuable. Some rivers had ferries operated by local boatmen, but others required travellers to cross shallow sections called fords. Crossing alone could be dangerous, especially if the water was deeper than expected or the current was strong. Groups of travellers could test the depth of the water, guide animals carefully across, and help lift wagons if they became stuck. This teamwork greatly reduced the risk of losing goods or equipment to the river. Travel during festivals or market seasons also encouraged group journeys. Many medieval towns held annual fairs that attracted merchants and buyers from distant regions. Travelers heading to these fairs often planned their departures so they could join others along the road. As the fair approached, the roads gradually filled with groups of merchants, performers, and pilgrims. These temporary caravans created a lively atmosphere where people shared news and companionship throughout the journey. Another important factor was the protection of women and families travelling long distances. Although many medieval journeys were undertaken by men, women also travelled for pilgrimages, family visits, or relocation. Travelling alone as a woman during the medieval period was considered particularly dangerous. Families or mixed groups provided safety and social protection, ensuring that everyone reached their destination safely. The presence of experienced travellers within a group also provided valuable guidance. Some individuals spent much of their lives travelling between towns and markets, gaining deep knowledge of roads, weather patterns, and regional customs. These experienced travellers often acted as informal leaders within the group. They knew where the next water source could be found, which roads were safer, and where travellers could expect hospitality. Following such guidance made the journey far less uncertain. Long journeys also required careful pacing to avoid exhaustion. If travellers moved too quickly, they risked injury or fatigue. If they moved too slowly, they might not reach shelter before nightfall. Groups helped establish a balanced pace that allowed everyone to progress steadily without overexertion. Travellers encouraged each other to keep moving during difficult stretches of road and reminded each other to rest when necessary. Medieval travellers also had to deal with unexpected encounters with soldiers or military patrols. During times of war or political tension, armed groups sometimes stopped travellers to question them or search for spies. A lone traveller could easily become the target of suspicion. A group of merchants or pilgrims, however, often had visible goods or religious symbols that made their purpose clear. Their collective presence made them appear less threatening and less suspicious. Another benefit of group travel was the sharing of shelter during sudden storms. Rainstorms could appear quickly and turn roads into slippery mud. Strong winds could make travelling dangerous, especially in open fields or mountain areas. Groups could work together to find shelter under trees, inside abandoned buildings, or beneath temporary coverings made from cloaks and wagon covers. This cooperation helped travellers stay warm and dry until the storm passed. During long journeys, travellers also learned from one another. A farmer travelling to a distant market might learn new farming techniques from someone in another region. A merchant might hear about a profitable new trade route. A pilgrim might learn about different religious traditions or stories associated with sacred places. These exchanges of knowledge made medieval travel an important way for ideas to spread between communities. Over time, the habit of travelling in groups became deeply ingrained in medieval culture. Even when roads were relatively safe, people still preferred companionship because it had proven effective for generations. Parents advised their children to find companions before beginning a long journey, and experienced travellers shared stories warning about the dangers of travelling alone. The road itself encouraged social interaction. Travellers greeted each other, exchanged information about upcoming villages, and sometimes walked together for several miles before parting ways. These brief partnerships helped create a sense of shared experience among people who might otherwise remain strangers. In many cases, travellers who began their journeys alone eventually joined others. They met along the road, A merchant leaving his hometown might start the journey by himself, but after encountering another traveller heading in the same direction, they might decide to continue together. As more travellers joined along the way, the group gradually grew into a small caravan. This pattern meant that medieval roads were often filled with moving clusters of people travelling toward different destinations. Some groups remained together only for a single day, while others stayed together for weeks or months. Regardless of how long the partnership lasted, the benefits of cooperation were clear. By sharing knowledge, supplies, and protection, travellers transformed the dangerous medieval road into a manageable path. The journey might still involve hardships, but facing those hardships together gave travellers confidence and resilience. Companionship reduced fear, increased safety, and turned a difficult journey into a shared adventure. For medieval people, the idea of travelling alone simply did not make sense when safer options existed. The risks of the road were too great to face without support. Whether they were merchants seeking profit, pilgrims searching for spiritual fulfillment, or ordinary villagers travelling to distant markets, most travellers understood the same simple lesson. On the medieval road, survival depended not only on courage and endurance, but also on cooperation. And for that reason, the vast majority of medieval travellers chose to walk the long roads of the world side by side rather than alone. Medieval travellers also had to consider the simple fact that journeys during that time often took far longer than people today. Might imagine even relatively short distances could require several days of travel. Roads were uneven, animals moved slowly when carrying heavy loads, and travellers had to stop frequently for rest, food or shelter. Because the journey was so long and physically demanding, companionship became extremely valuable. Walking or riding for hours across quiet landscapes could feel monotonous and mentally exhausting. Having others nearby allowed travellers to talk, share stories, and encourage one another to continue moving forward. Another important reason people preferred group travel was the danger of sudden accidents. Medieval roads were filled with hazards. Another important reason medieval travellers rarely journeyed alone was the uncertainty surrounding the reliability of shelters along the road. Inns existed in some regions, particularly near towns and trade routes, but they were far from guaranteed. A traveller could walk for an entire day expecting to find an inn by evening, only to discover that the building was closed, overcrowded, or had never existed at all. In such situations, groups of travellers had a better chance of finding solutions. They could pool money to persuade an innkeeper to make extra space, or they could cooperate in setting up a temporary camp outside a village. Temporary camps required several tasks that were easier to accomplish with multiple people. Firewood had to be collected, fires had to be built and controlled, animals needed to be secured, and food had to be prepared. One person alone might struggle to manage all these tasks before darkness fell. A group, however, could divide the responsibilities and complete them quickly. This organization allowed travellers to settle safely before nightfall. Medieval travellers were also aware of the dangers that came from unfamiliar terrain. Many routes passed through marshlands, rocky hills, and dense woodlands where the ground could suddenly become unstable. Travellers moving through such terrain had to remain alert for hidden dangers such as sinkholes, loose stones, or sudden drops in elevation. When travelling in groups, people could warn each other about hazards and assist anyone who stumbled or slipped. Bridges were particularly dangerous structures in the medieval world. Many were made from wood and were exposed to constant wear from weather and heavy wagons. Some bridges had partially collapsed sections or loose planks that could break under pressure. When a group approached such a crossing, they could test its stability carefully and guide animals across one at a time. If a wagon became stuck or damaged, several travelers could help push or lift it. A lone traveler faced much greater risk attempting such crossings without assistance. Another important element of medieval travel was the exchange of practical knowledge. Many travelers carried valuable information about the conditions of roads ahead. Someone coming from a distant town might warn others about a washed out bridge, a flooded path, or an area recently affected by bandits. These warnings helped travelers avoid danger and choose safer routes. When people traveled together, this information spread quickly through the group. Travelers also needed to be cautious when entering unfamiliar towns or villages. Local customs could vary widely from place to place. Some towns required travelers to pay entry fees, while others had strict rules about trade or lodging. A lone traveler might accidentally break a rule simply because they were unaware of it. In a group, someone often had previous experience visiting the town and could guide the others through the correct procedures. Another factor that encouraged group travel was the protection of personal reputation. During the medieval period, trust was extremely important for merchants and traders. If a traveler arrived alone and claimed to be a merchant, people might question their legitimacy. However, a group of merchants traveling together with wagons of goods appeared far more credible. Their collective presence signaled that they were engaged in legitimate trade rather than suspicious activity. Traveling in groups also helped maintain order during long journeys. Groups naturally developed informal leaders, individuals with experience, confidence, or knowledge of the road. These leaders helped decide when to start traveling each morning, when to stop for rest, and which route to take at uncertain intersections. Their guidance created structure within the group, reducing confusion and helping the journey progress smoothly. Weather forecasting was another challenge that groups managed better than individuals. Medieval people relied on careful observation of nature to anticipate changes in weather. Travelers watched cloud patterns, wind direction, and animal behavior to predict approaching storms. Within a group, several people could share their observations and interpret these signs together. If multiple travelers believed a storm was approaching, the group might decide to seek shelter earlier than planned. Another advantage of traveling with others was the opportunity to trade goods or services along the road. Travelers often carried small items that could be exchanged with companions. A merchant might trade a piece of cloth for extra food, while another traveler might offer assistance repairing equipment in exchange for supplies. These small exchanges strengthened cooperation within the group and ensured that everyone had what they needed to continue. Groups also provided emotional support during difficult moments of the journey. Long stretches of travel could feel discouraging, especially when the road seemed endless, or when bad weather slowed progress. Companions helped lift each other's spirits through conversation, humor, and shared determination. These moments of encouragement helped travelers maintain the strength needed to complete their journey. Another reason travelers preferred groups was the presence of spiritual companionship. Many medieval journeys were connected to religious purposes, particularly pilgrimages. Travelers heading towards sacred destinations often prayed together before beginning their daily travel. These shared prayers reinforced a sense of unity and purpose among the group. People believed that traveling together in faith increased their chances of divine protection during the journey. The sharing of responsibilities also made group travel more efficient. Some travelers specialized in particular tasks during the journey. One might be skilled at lighting fires quickly, another might be experienced in caring for animals, and another might be good at finding clean water sources. By relying on each other's abilities, the group functioned like a small cooperative community moving across the landscape. Another challenge of medieval travel involved transporting fragile goods. Items such as glass containers, delicate cloth, or metal tools could be damaged by rough movement during long journeys. Groups could help protect these goods by arranging wagons carefully and monitoring cargo throughout the journey. If goods shifted or became loose, travelers could stop and secure them before damage occurred. Travelers also faced the challenge of maintaining personal health during long journeys. Walking long distances could cause blisters, muscle pain, or dehydration. Within a group, people often shared simple remedies, such as herbal ointments or bandages. Travelers also reminded each other to drink water and rest when necessary. These small acts of care helped prevent minor discomforts from becoming serious problems. Another benefit of group travel was the opportunity to observe different traveling methods and learn from them. Someone traveling with a wagon might demonstrate efficient ways to pack cargo, while another traveler might show how to balance loads on a mule or horse. These observations allowed travelers to improve their own techniques for future journeys. During particularly dangerous stretches of road, groups sometimes tightened their formation to stay closer together. Travelers kept their animals and wagons within sight of one another so that no one became separated. This discipline reduced the risk of losing someone to the wilderness or encountering danger alone. When travelers eventually reached major towns or cities, they often parted ways with their companions. Some continued toward different destinations, while others remained in the city to trade goods or complete religious visits. Even though these partnerships were temporary, they left strong impressions on those who experienced them. Many travelers returned home with stories about the strangers who had helped them during difficult moments of the journey. These stories became part of the oral traditions of villages and towns, reinforcing the belief that cooperation on the road was both wise and necessary. In this way, medieval travel was rarely a solitary experience. The road brought together people from different backgrounds who shared the same goal of reaching their destination safely. Through cooperation, shared knowledge, and mutual protection, travelers transformed a dangerous and uncertain journey into a collective effort. The medieval road was not just a path connecting places, it was a moving network of people who depended on one another for survival. Every mile travelled together strengthened the understanding that companionship was the greatest protection a traveller could have. In a world filled with uncertainty, travelling with others turned the long and difficult road into a journey shaped by trust, resilience, and shared experience. Another reason medieval travellers rarely travelled alone was the difficulty of gathering reliable information about the road ahead. In the medieval world, there were no travel guides, navigation systems, or regularly updated maps available to ordinary people. Most knowledge about roads existed only in the memories of those who had travelled them before. When travellers moved in groups, they could combine their experiences. Someone might remember a dangerous swamp further along the route, while another might recall a monastery that offered shelter to travellers. This collective knowledge helped the group prepare for upcoming challenges. Travellers also faced the constant problem of finding clean drinking water. Streams and wells were not always safe to drink from, and stagnant water could easily cause illness. Experienced travellers often knew which rivers or springs were considered safe. In a group, such knowledge spread quickly. Another important factor that discouraged medieval travellers from journeying alone was the unpredictability of human encounters along the road. Roads were shared spaces where travellers from many different regions crossed paths. Some were merchants transporting goods, others were pilgrims seeking religious destinations, while some were wandering labourers searching for work. Although many of these encounters were peaceful, the uncertainty of meeting unfamiliar people made companionship valuable. A group of travellers could approach strangers with greater confidence, while a lone traveller might feel vulnerable and cautious. Travellers also had to be careful when passing through isolated countryside settlements. Small hamlets or farms often had their own customs and suspicions toward outsiders. In rural areas, strangers could sometimes be mistaken for thieves or spies, especially if they appeared alone, and without clear purpose. Groups of travellers were generally received with less suspicion because their purpose was easier to understand. Merchants travelling together with animals and goods clearly appeared to be engaged in trade, and pilgrims travelling together were often recognised by their clothing or symbols. Another challenge for medieval travellers was the management of time during the journey. Without reliable clocks, travellers measured the day by the position of the sun and the length of shadows. Groups could discuss and estimate how much daylight remained, and decide when it was best to stop for rest. Someone with experience travelling the route might advise the others that the next village was still several miles away, encouraging them to continue before nightfall. A lone traveller had to make these judgments alone, sometimes leading to poor decisions. Travellers also relied heavily on the condition of their footwear. Many people walked great distances on foot, and worn or damaged shoes could quickly become a serious problem. Blisters, torn soles, or soaked boots could slow a traveller dramatically. Within a group, someone might carry spare cloth or leather pieces to repair shoes temporarily. Such small acts of assistance helped prevent minor problems from forcing someone to abandon the journey. Another reason people preferred travelling together was the difficulty of protecting goods from environmental damage. Rain, dust, and mud could damage cloth, grain, or other trade goods. Groups often arranged their wagons and animals in ways that protected the most valuable cargo from weather exposure. Travellers could cover goods with cloaks or waxed cloth and secure them together so they remained stable during rough travel. The medieval landscape itself sometimes created natural obstacles that required cooperation to overcome. Fallen trees could block forest paths, rocks might slide onto mountain roads, and deep ruts could trap wagon wheels. Groups could clear obstacles or push wagons free from the mud. A lone traveller faced these obstacles with far fewer options and might be forced to turn back entirely. Travellers also benefited from the presence of witnesses during difficult situations. If disputes occurred with toll collectors, merchants, or innkeepers, a group provided witnesses who could support each other's claims. This made it less likely that someone would be cheated or treated unfairly. In a society where written records were limited, the testimony of multiple people carried significant weight. Another factor that encouraged group travel was the sharing of regional knowledge. Travelers often described the customs, foods, and traditions of their home regions while on the road. These discussions expanded everyone's understanding of the wider world. A merchant from one city might learn about new markets in another region, while a farmer might hear about different agricultural practices used elsewhere. Travelers also had to manage the care of their animals carefully. Horses and mules needed regular rest and feeding to remain healthy during long journeys. Groups could stop together near grassy areas where animals could graze safely. While some travelers watched the animals, others prepared meals or gathered water. This cooperation made it easier to care for both people and animals at the same time. The ability to organize defensive positions during dangerous moments also made group travel appealing. If travelers sensed danger ahead, such as suspicious individuals hiding near the road, they could tighten their formation and move cautiously together. Wagons might be placed closer together, and animals guided toward the center of the group. Such strategies created a stronger defense against potential attackers. Another subtle benefit of group travel was the ability to confirm rumors and stories heard along the road. Medieval travelers often relied on spoken information rather than written news. Someone might claim that a certain road was flooded or that a nearby town was suffering from disease. Within a group, travelers could discuss these claims and determine whether they were trustworthy. This collective judgment helped travelers avoid dangerous decisions based on unreliable information. Travelers also learned to coordinate their daily routines. Groups often developed predictable patterns, such as beginning the journey shortly after sunrise, resting during the hottest part of the day, and stopping before sunset. These routines helped maintain energy and ensured that travelers reached safe resting places before darkness. Camp arrangements also benefited from cooperation. When setting up camp, travelers often placed their wagons or packs in a circle to create a small protected area. Animals were tied nearby, and fires were built in safe locations. This arrangement created a sense of security and allowed travelers to monitor their surroundings more easily. Another aspect of medieval travel that encouraged group journeys was the difficulty of carrying large quantities of goods. Traders often transported bulky items such as grain sacks, barrels, metal tools, or textiles. A single traveler could not easily manage such cargo alone. Groups allowed merchants to combine their goods into organized caravans that moved steadily across the countryside. In many regions, travelers also followed routes that were known for having friendly monasteries or churches along the way. These religious institutions sometimes offered food, shelter, or medical care to travelers. Groups could plan their stops more effectively by sharing knowledge of where these places were located. Long journeys also created opportunities for mentorship among travelers. Experienced travelers often guided younger or less experienced companions, teaching them how to read the landscape, manage supplies, and remain alert to danger. These lessons prepared new travelers for future journeys. Stories about the dangers of traveling alone circulated widely in medieval communities. Tales of travelers who disappeared in forests or were robbed along isolated roads served as warnings to others. These stories reinforced the belief that companionship was not merely helpful but necessary for safety. Over time, these experiences shaped a strong cultural expectation that long journeys should be undertaken with companions. People planning to travel often waited in towns or villages, until they could find others heading in the same direction. Only then would they begin their journey. As groups formed and moved along the road, they created a network of travelers who shared news, resources, and protection. This network connected distant villages, towns, and cities in ways that went beyond simple trade or travel. The medieval road therefore became more than just a physical path between places. It became a social environment where cooperation and mutual support were essential. Travelers depended on each other not only for safety, but also for companionship, information, and shared experience. For these reasons, the idea of traveling alone seemed unnecessarily risky to most medieval people. The challenges of the road were simply too great for one person to face without support. By traveling together, people increased their chances of success and transformed difficult journeys into collective efforts. Thus, throughout the medieval world, travelers walked the long roads side by side. Merchants protecting their goods, pilgrims seeking spiritual fulfillment, and ordinary people searching for opportunity. Their shared journeys demonstrated a timeless lesson that cooperation often provides the strongest protection against the uncertainties of the world. Another important reason medieval travelers rarely journeyed alone was the challenge of navigating territories that were unfamiliar and constantly changing. During the Middle Ages, political boundaries were not always clearly defined. A road that began in the lands of one lord might cross into the territory of another without any clear marker. Each region could have different rules, taxes, or expectations for travelers. Groups of travelers could discuss how to handle these situations and decide together how to proceed. Someone who had previously passed through the region might know which tolls were legitimate and which were simply attempts to exploit travelers. Travelers also needed to remain aware of the condition of their animals throughout the journey. Horses and mules were valuable companions, but they could become tired, injured, or frightened. If an animal suddenly refused to continue or became injured, a lone traveller might have no way to carry their belongings. In a group, however, travellers could redistribute the load among several animals until the injured one recovered. This flexibility allowed the journey to continue, even when unexpected problems occurred. Another challenge that encouraged group travel was the need to find safe places for rest. During the middle of the day, long hours of walking or riding under the sun. Another factor that made medieval travellers avoid travelling alone was the unpredictability of transportation methods themselves. Unlike modern travel, where vehicles are designed for reliability, medieval transportation depended on animals, wooden carts, and rough road conditions. Wheels could break unexpectedly, harnesses could snap, and animals could become frightened by sudden noises or obstacles. When a wagon wheel cracked or a cart tilted dangerously, it required several people to stabilize it and repair the damage. A lone traveller dealing with such mechanical problems might have no immediate way to fix them, leaving them stranded in the middle of a road or deep in the countryside. Travellers also had to remain cautious of terrain that changed suddenly. Medieval roads often passed through hills, marshes, and narrow forest paths where the ground could become unstable. Heavy rain sometimes washed away sections of roads, leaving deep holes or soft mud that could trap wagons or animals. In these situations, groups of travellers could test the ground ahead carefully, warn others of danger, and help pull stuck carts back onto solid ground. Another important reason Travelers' preferred groups was the management of nightfall. As the sun began to set, travelers had to quickly find safe places to stop. Darkness arrived rapidly, and traveling after sunset was extremely risky. Roads became difficult to see, and unexpected obstacles could cause accidents. Groups of travelers could scout for suitable places to camp before the light disappeared. Some members searched for water or firewood, while others prepared the sleeping area. Camp organization was another aspect that benefited from group cooperation. Travelers usually placed their animals close together and arranged their belongings within a small protected area. Fires were built carefully to provide warmth and light without spreading to surrounding vegetation. Groups could create a safer and more organized campsite than a lone traveler attempting to manage everything alone. The presence of multiple travelers also improved security during these nighttime camps. While some members slept, others remained awake for short periods to watch for unusual movements or sounds. These watch rotations ensured that the group remained alert throughout the night. If danger appeared, the watchkeepers could quickly wake everyone. Another reason travelers rarely moved alone was the difficulty of estimating long distances. Medieval people did not measure distances with precise numbers like modern travelers do. Instead, they estimated travel time based on hours of walking or riding. Groups could discuss their progress and compare their estimates of how far they had traveled. This collaboration helped them decide whether to continue or stop for the day. Travelers also had to manage their energy carefully. A long journey could easily exhaust someone who attempted to travel too quickly. Groups naturally developed a balanced pace that allowed everyone to continue without becoming overly tired. Slower travelers were supported by the group, ensuring that no one was left behind. Another practical reason for group travel involved handling unexpected events along the road. Sometimes travelers encountered fallen trees blocking the path, broken bridges, or sudden floods that made rivers impossible to cross. When faced with these obstacles, groups could discuss alternative routes and decide together how to continue. Travelers also benefited from having companions who understood different parts of the journey. Someone who had previously traveled a particular road might know the safest river crossing or the location of a welcoming monastery. Others might recognize distant landmarks that indicated nearby villages or towns. The medieval road was also a place where travelers exchanged goods informally. If someone ran out of food or supplies, companions might trade items such as bread, cheese, cloth, or tools. These small exchanges helped maintain stability within the group and ensured that everyone had what they needed to continue. Another important factor was the care of pack animals during rest periods. Horses and mules needed time to graze and drink water. Groups could watch over the animals while others prepared meals or gathered firewood. This shared responsibility prevented animals from wandering away or becoming targets for thieves. Travelers also learned to pay attention to environmental signs that indicated nearby settlements. Smoke rising in the distance, church bells ringing faintly, or cultivated fields often meant that a village was nearby. Multiple travelers observing these signs together could confirm whether they were approaching civilization or still deep within wilderness. Another benefit of traveling together was the ability to adapt quickly to unexpected challenges. If a storm approached, the group could decide to seek shelter in a nearby structure or forest clearing. If the road became muddy after rain, Travelers could help each other maintain balance and guide animals through the slippery ground. Groups also created an atmosphere of shared responsibility that encouraged discipline. Travelers understood that careless behavior, such as wandering too far from the group or ignoring warnings, could place everyone at risk. As a result, most people respected the collective decisions made during the journey. During long journeys, travelers also formed bonds through shared storytelling. Around evening fires, people often spoke about their hometowns, families, and personal experiences. These conversations created friendships between individuals who had previously been strangers. Travelers sometimes sang songs or recited stories to pass the time while walking. Music and storytelling helped lighten the mood during difficult stretches of travel and created a sense of unity among the group. Another advantage of group travel was the opportunity to observe the traveling habits of others. Someone might notice a more efficient way to tie luggage onto a mule, or a better method for preserving food during long journeys. These observations improved the travelers' skills and made future trips safer. The presence of companions also reduced the psychological stress caused by unfamiliar surroundings. Forests, mountains, and distant valleys could feel intimidating to someone traveling alone. Within a group, however, the environment felt less threatening because people faced it together. Travelers also relied on each other to maintain alertness during the journey. When walking for long hours, fatigue could cause someone to lose focus and stumble or miss important signs along the road. Companions reminded each other to remain attentive and aware of their surroundings. As groups approached larger cities or trading centers, the road often became busier with other travelers. Groups sometimes merged with additional travelers heading in the same direction, forming larger caravans. These larger gatherings provided even greater security and companionship. Eventually, when travelers reached crossroads leading to different destinations, the group separated as each person continued toward their own goal. Despite these partings, the shared experience of traveling together often left a strong impression on everyone involved. People returned home with stories about the companions they had met and the obstacles they had overcome together. These stories reinforced the idea that cooperation was essential for safe travel. Over generations, these lessons became deeply rooted in medieval culture. Travelers understood that while courage and determination were important, the greatest protection came from companionship. Thus, medieval roads were rarely traveled in solitude. Instead, they were filled with small communities of people moving together across the landscape, sharing resources, exchanging knowledge, and supporting each other along the way. Through this shared effort, travelers transformed dangerous and uncertain journeys into cooperative experiences that connected distant places and people across the medieval world. Another reason medieval travelers rarely journeyed alone was the challenge of maintaining direction. Over long distances, where roads were poorly defined. In many regions, what people called a road was simply a track created by years of footsteps, wagon wheels, and animal hooves. These paths could split into several directions, fade into open fields, or disappear entirely in dense forests. When travelers moved in groups, they could discuss which direction seemed most correct and check for signs that others had used the same path. Multiple pairs of eyes increased the chance of staying on the correct route. Travelers also had to watch for signs left by previous travelers. Wagon ruts, broken branches, footprints, or small piles of stones sometimes indicated commonly used routes. In a group, different people could notice these signs and confirm whether they were still following the main path. A lone traveler might easily miss these subtle clues and wander away from the road without realizing it. Another important factor that encouraged group travel was the presence of dangerous terrain that required teamwork to cross safely. Narrow mountain paths, steep slopes, and rocky ridges were common obstacles along medieval routes. Wagons carrying goods often needed several people to guide them slowly through these areas. If a wheel slipped or an animal stumbled, other travelers could quickly assist in stabilizing the load. Without help, a single traveler might lose both equipment and animals during such crossings. Medieval travelers also depended heavily on the strength and health of their animals. Horses, mules, and oxen carried supplies and goods that people could not manage alone. If an animal became frightened by sudden sounds or movements, controlling it could require more than one person. Another reason medieval travelers rarely traveled alone was the constant uncertainty about what lay beyond the next hill or forest path. In the medieval world, the landscape itself often felt mysterious and unpredictable. Villages were scattered, forests were vast, and many areas remained sparsely populated. When someone travelled through these remote regions, there were long stretches where no houses, farms, or settlements could be seen. For a lone traveller, this emptiness could feel unsettling and even dangerous. But when people travelled in groups, the presence of companions transformed the silent wilderness into a shared experience, rather than an intimidating one. Travellers also relied heavily on cooperation when encountering steep or uneven terrain. Many medieval routes climbed over hills or descended into valleys where the ground became slippery or unstable. Wagons loaded with goods could easily tip over if handled incorrectly. Groups allowed travelers to guide each other carefully through these areas. Some walked beside the wagon to steady it, while others guided the animals pulling it. Without such teamwork, accidents could easily occur. Another factor that encouraged group travel was the difficulty of transporting fragile or valuable cargo. Many merchants carried items such as glass bottles, fine fabrics, or metal tools that could be damaged by rough travel. When traveling together, merchants could arrange their goods carefully and monitor them during the journey. If cargo shifted or loosened during movement, several travelers could quickly stop and fix the problem. Travelers also depended on each other when encountering unfamiliar animals or wildlife along the road. While wolves were the most commonly feared predators, other animals such as wild boars could also be dangerous if startled. When people traveled in groups, the noise and movement of multiple individuals often discouraged animals from approaching. The combined presence of humans made wildlife more cautious. Another reason travelers moved together was the challenge of finding reliable paths through forests. Dense forests often contained many small trails created by animals or local woodcutters. These trails could look very similar to the main road and easily confuse someone unfamiliar with the area. Groups could check these paths together, comparing observations and ensuring they remained on the correct route. Travelers also benefited from shared observation when looking for signs of nearby settlements. Small details such as smoke rising above trees, distant church bells, or cultivated fields could indicate that a village was nearby. When several travelers watched for these signs together, they were less likely to miss them. The medieval road also served as a place where travelers could exchange practical advice. Someone who had recently come from a certain town might explain which inns were welcoming to travelers, or which markets offered fair prices for goods. Others might warn about roads damaged by floods or areas recently troubled by bandits. This exchange of information helped travelers prepare for the next stages of their journey. Another important reason travelers avoided traveling alone was the need to conserve energy. Long journeys demanded physical endurance, especially for those traveling on foot. Walking with companions allowed travelers to maintain a comfortable rhythm. When someone became tired, the group often slowed slightly so that everyone could continue together. Travelers also shared responsibilities when preparing camps for the night. One person might gather water from a nearby stream, another might collect firewood, and another might prepare food. These tasks were completed much more quickly when several people worked together. The presence of companions also helped maintain vigilance during travel. When people walked for long hours, fatigue could cause them to become less aware of their surroundings. Within a group, travelers reminded each other to remain alert, especially when passing through unfamiliar or potentially dangerous areas. Another advantage of group travel was the ability to solve unexpected problems creatively. If a bridge had collapsed or a path was blocked by fallen trees, travelers could discuss alternative routes and explore solutions together. This collective problem solving increased their chances of continuing the journey successfully. Travelers also formed bonds of trust during these shared experiences. After several days on the road together, strangers often began to rely on each other. They shared stories about their families, hometowns, and reasons for traveling. These conversations helped create friendships that made the journey more meaningful. The medieval road also became a place where cultural traditions were exchanged. Travelers shared songs, legends, and folk tales from their regions. These stories helped pass time during long walks and introduce companions to different traditions and beliefs. Another reason people preferred traveling in groups was the protection offered by shared visibility. A large group moving along the road could be seen from a distance, making it easier for others to identify them as ordinary travelers rather than suspicious individuals. This visibility helped prevent misunderstandings with villagers or guards. Travelers also relied on each other when managing supplies such as salt, grain, or dried meat. If someone miscalculated their food supply, companions could share small portions until new supplies were obtained. This sharing prevented hunger from weakening members of the group. Another advantage of group travel involved learning new routes. Some travelers had extensive knowledge of regional roads and could guide others through unfamiliar territory. Younger or less experienced travelers often learned from these guides, gaining valuable knowledge for future journeys. Groups also helped protect travelers from the emotional strain of isolation. Spending days alone in quiet landscapes could lead to loneliness and anxiety. Companionship provided comfort and helped travelers remain calm even in uncertain environments. During difficult weather conditions, groups often stayed closer together. Strong winds, heavy rain, or thick fog could reduce visibility and make it easy for someone to become separated. Traveling closely as a group ensured that everyone remained within sight of each other. Another small but meaningful advantage of group travel was the sharing of entertainment. Travelers sometimes played simple games, told humorous stories, or sang songs to keep spirits high. These moments of laughter helped balance the hardships of travel. As travelers approached major towns or pilgrimage destinations, the roads often filled with even larger groups of people. Pilgrims from different regions joined together, forming long lines of travelers moving toward the same sacred sites. The road during these times could feel like a moving community rather than a lonely path. Eventually, when travelers reached crossroads or city gates, many groups separated as individuals continued toward different destinations. Yet the memories of shared travel often remained strong. People returned home telling stories about the companions who helped them cross rivers, repair wagons, or find shelter during storms. These stories spread through villages and reinforced the idea that cooperation on the road was essential. In the medieval world, travel demanded courage, patience, and resilience. But above all, it required companionship. The dangers of the road were simply too many for one person to face alone. For this reason, medieval travelers almost always sought others heading in the same direction before beginning a long journey. By walking together, they transformed a dangerous and uncertain road into a shared path filled with cooperation, conversation, and mutual protection. Thus, the medieval road was rarely a lonely place. Instead, it was filled with moving groups of travelers who relied on each other to face the challenges of distance, wilderness, and uncertainty. Their journeys connected distant lands and communities, carried stories and goods across regions, and demonstrated the enduring human instinct to seek safety and strength in the company of others. Another reason medieval travelers rarely traveled alone was the challenge of maintaining awareness of their surroundings over long periods of time. A journey could last several days or even weeks, and during that time travelers had to constantly observe the road, the weather, their animals, and the condition of their supplies. Remaining alert for so many hours each day was exhausting. In a group, travelers naturally shared this responsibility. While some watched the road ahead, others looked behind or paid attention to the environment around them. This collective awareness made it much harder for danger to approach unnoticed. Travelers also had to be careful about where they rested during the day. In open countryside, certain locations provided better protection than others. A shaded area near water might appear comfortable, but it could also attract animals or insects. Groups could discuss the best places to stop, considering both comfort and safety. Someone with previous travel experience might recognize locations that were safer than others. Another important advantage of traveling together was the ability to keep track of distance more accurately. Medieval travelers did not measure miles the way people do today. Instead, they estimated travel by the number of hours walked, or by landmarks passed along the road. When traveling in a group, people could compare their impressions of how far they had gone and how much farther they might need to travel before reaching the next settlement. Travelers also had to consider the condition of their clothing throughout the journey.